Hi, I'm Norm Abram, and welcome once again to the New Yankee Workshop. Today we continue presenting programs of interest from past seasons here at the workshop. The antique reproduction that you'll see me build today was copied from one we found in a wonderful shop on the corner of Monterey Square in Savannah, Georgia, where the subject house for our This Old House project was underway. Now, the antique furniture market in Savannah is very intense. There are a lot of shops and knowledgeable customers who want the best. Raskin's Antiques is one of those shops, and thus we spent some time there looking for a good example of a highboy or a tall chest we could build back here in the workshop. All too often, the size of these chests is too tall for today's bedrooms, or the chest is so high only the tallest users or those willing to use a steps tool could utilize the topmost drawers. It was made of mahogany, a favorite wood for furniture makers, and featured brass hardware, not unlike that still being reproduced today. The project would involve some dovetailing, the use of mahogany veneer plywood, and some nicely cut Chippendale feet, all of which we could manage here in the workshop. So here's how we found and made that mahogany 7-drawer chest. That's next, right here in the New Yankee Workshop. I love this place. It's jammed full of wonderful antiques. Look at this pine armoire. It has some faux bamboo decoration. I've never seen anything quite like that. Over here, a nice small writing desk made out of walnut. And check this out, an Art Deco vanity set, 1940. They've got a console table over here, similar to the one I built a few years ago. This one has 4 legs. The one I built had 3. Now over in the back room here, there's a couple dressers I want you to see. This one is very nice, but I really like this one right here. This is one of Alex Raskin's best pieces. It's an English mahogany chest-on-chest, 1800. And what I like about it is the height. It's not so high that I can't easily see into the top drawer. It has beautiful brasses. The drawer fronts are all nicely dovetailed to the sides, and the drawer front is wrapped with this nice little bead. The top of the chest can easily be removed from the base, and if you come around the corner, I want to show you the feet. They're just flat, 3/4 inch thick boards that are elegantly shaped. I think we'll measure this piece up. Well, how'd I do? Would Alex Raskin approve? I think so. He might even put it on the floor of his shop, but he couldn't sell it as an antique, maybe as a close reproduction of that original. Now, if you'd like to build our 7-drawer chest, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, to get started today, I want to build the dust frames that go between the drawers. There's 5 of them in all. They're made up of 3/4 inch birch plywood frames and 1/4 inch Luan plywood panels. Now, before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now, to make the grooves for the 1/4 inch panels, I'm using the 2 outside cutters from my stacked dado head, no chippers. I've carefully adjusted the fence and run a sample. Now, when I run the pieces through, I'll run one side against the fence, then the other side against the fence to be sure that that groove is perfectly centered. With some chippers added to my dado blades to increase the width and a sacrificial wood strip so that it won't hit my metal fence, I'm able to mill a tenon. Now that tenon fits into the groove. And this simple little joint is more than enough to hold our frames together. All the dust frames are identical except for the top 2. They need an additional groove for the divider. There's the groove in the center crosspiece. And there's the groove in the front piece. The back is identical. To put the pieces together, just a little bit of glue in the mortise and tenon, and we'll clamp it up. No pins or nails whatsoever. Now the 1/4-inch panel just slips in the grooves. No glue there. There's the top piece. We'll let these dry and we'll start making the panels for the main carcasses. So here are all my pieces for the carcasses, cut to size and perfectly square. The next step is to make a series of dados and rabbets to receive the dust frames and the plywood back. But one of the things I found about plywood recently is that it's running a bit undersized. In fact, about a 32nd of an inch less than 3/4 of an inch. That makes a little bit of a problem when you want to cut dados. You would normally use 2 outside cutters and 3 chippers of an 1/8 inch. And to make up the difference, you'd have to use a 1/16 inch chipper and several shims. Some manufacturers have started to make a 3/32 inch chipper, which is perfect for this new plywood. Those rabbets are for the plywood back. These carcasses are virtually airtight boxes. There's tops, bottoms, and backs. You can see a bit of the birch plywood at the top of the lower carcass. There's another piece on the bottom. They sit in rabbets cut in the end panels. Okay, well that takes care of the dados for the moment. Let's do some assembly. A little bit of glue in the rabbets and the dado. And I'll just tip the panel in place. Hold it square and flush to the front. And secure it with some 1.5 inch brads. And now the 1/4 inch plywood back. And if I've cut the plywood nice and square, our carcass will be perfectly square. Well, before I finish nailing it off, I'll check it for square. 42 7/8 strong. 42 7/8 strong. Now, wherever the plywood doesn't show, I use this birch plywood, which is more economical than the mahogany, as with this bottom shelf of the upper carcass. There's the divider between the 2 upper drawers. This is the top piece of the upper carcass. And there's the back for the upper carcass. All right, we're gaining on it. The next thing to do is to cover all the plywood edges with some solid mahogany. The first pieces to apply are these vertical pieces, or the stiles. I'm just using a little bit of glue and some 1 1/4 inch brads. All right, now once these are all on, we'll do a little bit of sanding. Now here I'm using some 5/4 mahogany, which will become the feet of the chest. Now I'll just sand them smooth to the line with my handy oscillating sander. If you look at the prototype, you can see that the feet are mitered at the front corner. And I'm set up at the table saw to do that, with the blade tipped to 45 degrees, the foot blank clamped to my miter gauge so it won't move as I pass it through. The back legs are not mitered, but they do need a dado into which will fit this plywood brace. To reinforce that miter joint, I'm cutting some slots for some biscuits. The first step in attaching the feet is to install some glue blocks, and I'm using some of my moisture-cured glue for extra strength. For the miters, a little bit of glue on the surface and some on the biscuit on one side only, and we'll just squeeze it together. Okay. Okay, and it just sits right there. A couple more nails. And that's what it looks like when it's finished. Well, tomorrow we've got the moldings to make and install, and we've got to build the drawers. But I think we'll finish this project. We'll make it. Well, good morning. Last night I stayed around the shop long enough to do some final sanding on the carcasses that we built yesterday. And this morning I got started by cutting some parts for our drawers. Now, if you look at the drawer, you can see that the front is joined to the side with half-blind dovetails. And the plywood drawer front has its edges wrapped with solid mahogany that's rounded over on the front edge. Now, over here are some of the parts for the drawer. 2 side pieces made up of 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood, which has no voids, so it's excellent for drawers. Here's the back piece. A piece of 1/4 inch plywood for the drawer bottom, and a piece of 3/4 inch mahogany plywood for the drawer front. And here's those solid strips that I'll wrap the front with. I'll show you how I made these. To make those strips, I'm starting out with some 5/4 mahogany, and I've jointed each edge. I've set my rip fence to rip a 1/8 inch strip. Now, to make that nice little bead, all I'm using is a 1/8 inch diameter beading bit. And I've set it so that I'm just using the portion that rounds over the edge. Now it's just a matter of cutting each corner at a 45-degree angle and fitting the pieces. They'll be attached with some glue and some 5/8" brads. Now when I nail on these end pieces, I want to keep the nails as close as possible to the front of the draw front piece because I don't want to run into them when I cut the dovetails. That groove in the draw sides is necessary to receive the back. With the same setup that I used to make the grooves in the dust frames, the two outside cutters of my stacked dado, I'm going to make grooves in the draw front and sides for the bottom. Here at my dovetailing jig, I've installed one of the draw sides with the inside facing out. I've adjusted the fingers for the dovetail layout that I want, and I've installed these little filler pieces of wood which will help guide the collar which I've installed on my router. I'm using a 1/2" dovetailing bit. We'll cut the tails first. With the draw front mounted in the top of the jig, I can flip over the finger assembly to mill the pins. Now I found building the prototype that I have to be careful when I do this. The thin strip that I've wrapped the draw front tends to tear out as I run the router bit into the end of the material. So I'm going to back it up with a sacrificial piece of plywood, and that'll eliminate that problem. All right, let's see how we did. That's great. The dovetail joint is an ancient joint, but by the nature of its shape, and especially when we add a little bit of glue to it, we end up with an incredibly strong joint. There's no way that the draw front is ever going to pull loose from the sides. And the other thing about the dovetail joint, it's just so beautiful. And that takes care of the back. And finally, the bottom. Here I'm adding a couple cleats for the lower draw to run on. All right, that looks good. Now we can start working on the moldings, and we'll start with this base molding that sits on top of the feet. I've installed an OG bit at my router table and a couple feather boards, one to hold the stock tight to the table, one to hold the stock against the fence. I've run a bit of a sample. Now I can just run the pieces through. Now just rip it to width. And that's what it looks like when it's installed. Now we're ready to make a molding for the waist, where the two chests come together. That's another profile. Now I've installed a multi-profile bit, and that'll give me a cove and a roundover at the same time. And now I just need to rip the piece to its final height in this case. And that's what this one looks like installed. Now I'm ready to start working on the cornice molding, which is actually made up of 3 pieces. There's an upper piece, a cove, and a bead detail. I'll start with the cove first. The stock that I'm going to make the cove from is 7/8 of an inch thick and 4 inches wide. I've clamped 2 straight edges to my saw table at about 40 degrees. And that'll allow me to guide the piece through securely. Now, I'm going to raise the blade up just a little bit at a time and make several passes, but by the time I'm done, I'll have the cove I want. I'm setting the rip fence at 1.5 inches to get a piece from each edge. Now that's good. Now before we do any more, let's sand the cove smooth. For the molding of the top piece of the cornice, I've installed a sash molding bit in my router station. Now this is a bit that comes as part of a kit for making window sash or muttons. I've attached 2 blocks to the fence that are cut at a 45-degree angle, and I've set a piece of plywood which is also cut at a 45-degree angle to support the piece as I push it through. The next operation is to knock off this little point, and that's best done at the table saw. All right, one more piece to go, a little decorative bead that goes underneath the cove. Now I'm using the same 1/8 inch diameter router bit that I used to make the trim that wrapped the draw fronts. I've run 2 corners on this piece of stock. Now I'll rip out the individual pieces at the table saw. Well, for the hardware, I'm going to use these brass bales with rosettes that are very close to what was on the original. But before I finish installing those, I think it's time we take this piece and put some finish on the wood. The finish for our chest is going to be a big deal if you want a classic look. What you see here is the beginning. I started with this powder. It's a brown mahogany dye that gets mixed with water and wiped on to give us the color that we want. The step that I'm doing now is to seal the dye with some orange shellac. We bought the orange shellac flakes, mixed it with alcohol in a 1-pound cut. Okay, now after the shellac dries, I give it a light sanding with some 220 grit paper. Mahogany is a very porous material, and if you want a nice smooth finish, you have to fill in the pores, which I will rub in with a brush some of this paste filler. Once the filler has dried, I'll sand it lightly once again, put another coat of shellac on it to seal it, and then a couple top coats of polyurethane to really give it the protective finish. Well, it took a while to complete the finish on our mahogany chest, but I think it was worth it, and the brasses really add the finishing touch. Now, next time we're going to build something completely different, a bent wood hat rack. Now, in order to bend wood like this, you have to steam it, and I'll show you how next time right here on the New Yankee Workshop.